Hi, in this video I'm going to be demonstrating how to repair an oil seal. The oil seal is on the alternator side. Right, so in order to get to the seal I need to open this. For the purposes of the video I'm going to be taking the fuel tank out so that it's easier to see. However, it's not a requirement to remove the fuel tank. I'm just removing it so that it's easier to show in the video. Right, so in order to get the fuel tank out I need to remove these two metal pieces over here. This is a size 12. Right, make sure the tank is empty. So I'm going to disconnect the fuel line. Right, over here is the fuel tap. So what I need to do is open these retaining clips. You can use pliers or your fingers, and then I just pull that away. Now, the tap is open, and as you can see, there's no petrol flowing because the tank is empty. But on your side, make sure the tank is empty before you start working with the tank. Now, this is the tap. I'm going to remove this now so that it doesn't get damaged while I'm working with the tank. Now on this generator, this nut is a 22. Some generators have the fuel tap fastened into the fuel tank. Right, there's the fuel tap and the filter. This tank is completely dry. This is a size 8. I just support it here with my finger and unscrew this. Right, there are these screws. It has a washer and then a sleeve. And this sleeve is encapsulated with a rubber bushing. So there's the rubber bushing. Right, so the tank is now free from the generator. I can actually lift it out completely. Right, so I'm at the back here. I need to open this cover. All right, so that was a size 8. Someone's obviously opened this before because here I have a screw, which is a star. Right, to get to that seal, it's quite far in, so I have to remove all of this. Now, if the generator's off, there's no shock hazard or anything like that. I'm just wearing gloves because it gives me more grip. Right, so this is a size 8. Right, so this is the regulator. Now, there's a post here. I'm just going to remove this post. Right, so that allows me to move these wires out of the way. Right, these are all size 12. Now, in this case, I can't get this out until I've taken the exhaust out because the exhaust is blocking this. There's 2 screws at the bottom here, and then I need to remove the screws that are holding the exhaust onto the frame. All right, so I'll flip the unit around. I need to remove 1, 2, 3, and then there's 2 screws here, quite corroded. I'm just taking a silicone spray, penetrating lubricant, and letting that penetrate while I open the other screws. These are size 10. Now there are 2 screws at the back, size 10. It is corroded, so it's quite stiff. Right, catch this gasket. There's a gasket here. If these screws are not coming out, you can also open the nuts below over here. Now I need to remove this nut over here and that nut over there. Now for the purposes of this video, I have this upright. If you are going to be doing this repair upright, just make sure you support the engine underneath. I have a brick here and the engine is resting on a brick. Right, I need to get this off, so I need to get these out of this frame here. But first I'm going to remove this. There's a screw just holding this plate on the side here. In order to not damage this regulator, I'm going to remove it. These clips are quite tight, so all I do is I take my long nose pliers and I squish that part underneath, and then at the same time I pull. I'm just going to remove this over here. Now, very important is when you're removing this, just be careful of these brushes. So I've removed that. Now I can remove this whole regulator plus the brushes. Now for now, I'm not going to disconnect these. I might be able to pull this out without having to disconnect it. There is an earth wire here, which I am going to remove. Right, if you've got an impact driver, then you can remove this nut. It's a size 13. However, if you're trying to loosen this nut, it is going to turn the rotor. That means that I'd need to take a spanner on the opposite side to hold the drive shaft in place. If you're unable to open the nut, you can open the vent on the side of the generator and wedge a screwdriver while loosening that nut. On the side of the generator, there is a shield. If you remove the shield, you can insert a screwdriver into the vent here, and then you can loosen the nut. Right, now I just need to remove these long threaded rods on the side. There are 4 of them. Right, there's also a long screw here and there, size 8. Right, to get this off, I need to tap it loose. So here's my hammer, and I'm tapping it a little bit on the one side, a little bit on the other side, and I move my way around in order to slide this off. When doing this repair, it's better to have the generator on the floor, not upright like I have it. I have it upright just for the camera. So in your case, tapping the frame off at the back will be much easier. Right, so here's the stator and here's the rotor. Now what I need to do is to get to the seal, I need to get this rotor out. This rotor is difficult to get out. Might be easier to get the stator out of the way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift the stator. Now you might find that the stator is a little bit snug. I just wrap my hammer in a little cloth here, and then I tap on the side of the stator just to loosen it because it's wedged at the bottom here. Now I'm doing the video with this upright because it's easier to video it like that, but in your case this will probably be horizontal, which will be much easier. I'm going to pull the stator out. Okay, it is coming out. Okay, now to get the rotor out, if your rotor is wedged and you can't get it out, like at the moment I cannot get this out, I take a hammer and I take that same screw and I tap it. I don't hit on the bearing because I run the risk of damaging the bearing in different directions. So I've tapped it in different directions just to loosen the rotor. Now what I need to do is lift this rotor out. In this case, I'm able to get it out quite easily. Right, so over here is the seal, and it's just out. I mean, it's just sitting there. So that's why this thing was leaking oil. You might even see there's some residue oil. And there was also this little nut, which I find in the corner there, which goes with this long threaded rod, which I removed much earlier. Right, here's the faulty seal, and here are some replacement seals. What I'm looking for are the numbers on the face of the seal. In this case, there's a 35, a 5.2, and an 8. What that means is the 35 is the inner diameter, so that's the inside, 34.88 millimeters, and then the outside, 51.95, so call it 52, and then the height, there's 8. So this is the faulty one, and I'm going to replace it. Now I've got these two options. The only problem is this one is a little bit thin. This is a 7 millimeter, so the thickness is a bit thin, while this one over here is a 35, 52, 10. So it's slightly thicker, and that's fine. So I'm going to be using that one. So this would be going on there, but before I put it there, I'm going to clean the area using some thinners. Right, so I'm just using enamel thinners. So I'm just cleaning it inside there, so there's no oil inside there at all on either surface. And I take the new seal, I just wipe it down as well. I don't want any oil, and I also wipe my fingers. I don't want any oil on my fingers while I do this job. So it's almost sticky now. I'm just using a sealant, and I'm just putting some on the outside of this oil seal. So I'm coating the edge here. Now I'm going to take an all-purpose grease, and I'm just going to coat the inside and or the shaft. So here's the shaft where the inside of that oil seal is going to mate, and I'm just putting a little bit on the shaft. I'm making sure I do not get any on the outside rim here, only on the shaft here. And you can also put on the inside of the oil seal. Just put some here. That stops the rubber from grabbing and that spring possibly falling out. Now I can actually just drop this on the shaft. Now to seat that seal, you can also use the old seal to put on top and then tap it in. I'm going to use this old PVC pipe, and most important is that when I tap it in, it goes in evenly. Try to tap on the edges rather than on the middle. And it's just a light tap. So there's the old seal, and I'm just using that. Now just be careful because you don't want to tap it too hard. So we don't want it to fall in there and be too recessed. It's still fine, but I don't want it proud either. It must be in. Right, it's flush on this side, but it's proud on this side by about 1 millimeter. So it still needs to go in a bit more on that side. Right, so it is flush here. It's a little bit lower than the edge here, which is fine. I'm going to take a little bit of the sealing compound and just put it on the sides. You don't have to do this step. This is just giving you extra protection. I'm only putting it on the edges. Right, the seal is in, and I put a little bit of that silicone around the edges here, just on the edges, giving a second line of defense if it will leak. There in the middle, that must not have any of the sealant. I put a little bit of grease on the middle there, so this can spin nicely and there'll be very little friction on the inner diameter of that oil seal. Right, now what I'm going to do is reassemble. While I have the rotor out, I just inspect the bearing. There's no noise coming from the bearing. It's pretty stable. I have these two tracks here. I can see there's very fine lines here. So I'm just taking a very fine sandpaper. This is like 1000 grit, and all I'm doing is I'm polishing these lines. I'm not sanding it, it's just polishing it. I'm just getting the layer of dirt off here. Right, so those are clean, and now it's time to install this rotor. I just take some thinners and clean the shaft here, so there's no lubrication there at all, it's dry. Right, so I'm just putting the stator back on. Right, when returning this, it's very important to get this in the right alignment. Now, here are the mountings that hold the back of this engine in place. So I know for a fact that this must go in there and this must go in there. So this is correct in terms of its alignment. Now the stator has moved a bit, and how do I know which way to put it back? Well, now I use these long threaded rods. So the threaded rod goes in here and goes through all the way through this ferrite here of the stator. So what I need to do is I need to make sure that this is in alignment here and that these can be fed through these holes. Then everything else will be in alignment. Now I'm going to feed this in here and find the spot where it's going to go in. So it's there. Now you might see that this is off center, so I already know that I need to shift it a bit. And if I put the other one on the other side, that's going to help me to get this alignment right. Right, I'm turning the stator to make sure that these line up with these mountings. So I'm just gently turning, yeah, a bit too much. I don't turn this because I might just snap these rods. I'm turning the stator. Right, so once I'm happy with the alignment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fasten these two so that this fastens onto the back of the stator. Right, I'm just tapping this down a little bit. So I've put the first one in there, and I need to get the nut on that side, and that is why I put it horizontally. So I have my screwdriver ready, and I'm going to be screwing it in there, but I need to get this nut on that side. So I just need to open this a little bit, and there I can see the threaded rod, so I just have to get the nut on there. So I'm getting this threaded through there and just getting the nut here. Now I'm not going to make it very tight now. I'm going to do the other side first. Now the other side is on the underside, so I'll be working on the underside. Right, I've done both of them. Right, now just check that these will all be in the right place. I can get to the connectors. This can screw in correctly. The wiring is correct here. Right, I make sure that the stator is seated correctly, and I just gently tighten these one by one, and I thread these one by one. I'm not actually making them tight, I'm just threading them. Right, now it's imperative that the frame here around the stator mounts correctly, and that the stator gets in at the bottom here. So there's a little crevice for the stator. I don't let it sit on top there, it goes inside there, and that is why I tighten these screws one side, just a little bit. Opposite, 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 opposite. And slowly this seats and it starts pressing on that bearing, seating onto the bearing. If you want to, once it's seated a bit, you can tap it a bit just to help it a bit. And then I go around again. So I'm going opposite, 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 opposite. And slowly this is getting tight. It's seating into the bearing. These ones over here are now getting loose again, and they can be tightened as well. Right, now it's time to reinsert this long screw. Right, because this moves while I'm tightening it, I take my screwdriver and I put it in the vent here at the bottom, and I just block it so I can just tighten it. Right, now I'm going to mount this back onto these mountings over here, so that will keep the engine back in alignment. Right, there's a little tooth there that goes in the hole. Just remember to line that correctly. Right, very important. Now that this is seated, these need to be tightened again. Right, that one's tight. Right, I'm here at the bottom and I'm just putting this heat shield on. And there's a little screw here. Right, so I'm just putting this bracket on. There's 2 screws. I'm going to fit the exhaust now. The old gasket is fatigued, so I'm going to replace it. I've got a nearly new one. Right, I'm on this side. I'm just mounting these 2 screws that hold this unit. I'm not making them tight. I'm just mounting them just to hold it in place while I align the exhaust. Right, I'm just putting a gasket there. Right, getting the gasket in place. Right, so this frame goes on top of these flanges, and then the cover goes like this. There's threads on either side here, so it goes at the back like that. Right, so I'm going to mount this platform here. Right, size 8. Right, here's the regulator and here are the brushes. They're a little bit worn, so I just need to make sure that they are still compressing onto the rings here. Right, I've just looked inside to see that these brushes are still on the rings and it's about like that. So there's, call it 3 millimeters of wear still available. So it's still fine. Then I just twist that and I put the nut there, size 8. Right, now I'm fitting the regulator. Now I'm plugging in the connectors that I opened. Now, if I look at the lid, there's quite a lot of space here, so I don't have to push these inside there. It's fine the way it is. What I'm interested in is that there's nothing that is going to catch on the rotor when the rotor spins. So all of these wires are actually fine. And then lastly, there's an earth wire that was removed, and that also needs to be screwed in. Now, these 2 on the side are for the exhaust system. They just need to be tightened. Now, unfortunately, this has come off here, so I'll just need to solder this or crimp this back on this connector. Right, so I'm just exposing the copper a bit, and I'm putting a new connector on, and then I'm just going to crimp it. Right, now I can just close this cover. Right, the seal must dry for at least 12 hours. Right, I'm installing a new petrol tank because the other one is completely rusted, so it might look a bit different. Right, so here are the screws and the bushings, but the new tank already has bushings included. So all I need are the fastening screws. And this is a size 8. I don't tighten them all yet, I just tighten them a little bit to make sure it's aligned, and then I tighten them. Right, I just reattach the fuel line. Right, I check the condition of the pipe. The rubber is still in good condition. I move these clips so that it fastens onto the pipe over just beyond the nipple. Right, I'm putting these 2 rails on. They go here and here. Right, so I've just put some double-sided tape just to assist these rubber rings. They have fatigued. You won't see it, but it will perform its task. Right, I just measure that it's equidistant on both sides. Turn the nut and bolt. Right, since this generator had an oil leak, before I turn it on, I've just got to inspect the oil level. Do this on a horizontal surface, making sure that the generator is flat. Okay, so this generator needs some oil. Right, I just topped it up with some oil. The voltage output is correct, which means the regulator is functioning correctly. All the wiring is correct. Right, let it run with a load of at least 25% the full load, and then make sure there are no oil leaks. Thanks for watching and cheers.